I stopped answering my radio 3 hours ago. The overnight shift at Mount Harrow Observatory was supposed to be quiet. Data collection, equipment checks, log entries. Dr. Reeves did it for 6 years without incident. But Dr. Reeves requested a transfer 2 weeks ago. He didn't give a reason, didn't finish his notice period. Just left his access card on the desk and drove down the mountain. I found his notebook on my second night. The observatory sits at 9,200 feet, 20 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a single-lane service road that switchbacks through dense pine forest. The main building is small, brutally functional. Concrete walls, narrow hallways, everything built to withstand the wind and snow. The telescope dome rises above it like a cathedral built for something other than God. They told me I'd be alone up here. That was the arrangement. The notebook was in the control room, tucked behind the main console, leather-bound, filled with Dr. Reeves' cramped handwriting. The first 30 pages were normal. Equipment readings, maintenance notes, observations of deep space objects. Then the entries changed. November 8th. Heard movement in the dome after midnight. Checked twice. Nothing there. November 12th. The movement is regular now, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always from the same section of the catwalk. November 17th. I'm not imagining it. Something is observing the telescope from inside the dome. I didn't believe it. Dr. Reeves was 53, divorced, probably lonely. The isolation got to him. It happens. But I started paying attention after midnight. The dome is vast, 60 feet across, the telescope mounted on a central platform surrounded by catwalks and service ladders. Everything echoes. Every footstep, every breath, every small shift of metal against metal. During observations, the dome rotates with a grinding mechanical groan that drowns out everything else. But in the silence between rotations, you can hear everything. I heard it on my fourth night. A soft scraping sound from the upper catwalk, like fabric dragging across metal. It moved slowly, deliberately, from west to east, then stopped directly above the telescope's eyepiece. I was at the control console, 40 feet away. I called out, asked if anyone was there. The scraping stopped. I waited 5 minutes, then climbed the ladder. The catwalk was empty. No footprints in the dust, no disturbance of any kind. But the air felt different up there, colder, dense like before a storm. And there was a smell, faint, organic, like old paper or sun-dried leaves. I went back to the console and continued the observation sequence. The scraping resumed at 2:47 a.m. This time I didn't investigate. I marked it in the log as building settling and tried to focus on the data. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing on that catwalk, waiting for me to look away from the screen. Dr. Reeves' final entries were harder to read. The handwriting deteriorated. Words scratched out, rewritten, scratched out again. November 23rd. It watches the telescope. Not me, the telescope. Like it's trying to see what we're seeing. November 28th. I turned off the dome lights tonight. Used a flashlight to move around. It didn't make the sounds when the lights were off. I think it prefers the dark. December 2nd. I made eye contact. That entry had a stain beneath it. Something dark and dried. Maybe coffee, maybe not. The next page was blank except for a single line at the bottom. Don't use the telescope after midnight. I used the telescope after midnight. The observation schedule required it. I had targets to catalog, deep space objects visible only during specific hours. I couldn't just abandon the work because of strange sounds in a paranoid notebook. On my 9th night, I was tracking a nebula cluster in the Orion constellation. The telescope was locked onto the coordinates, the dome rotated into position, and I began the exposure sequence. 45 minutes of data collection. I couldn't move the telescope during that time. At 1:33 a.m., the scraping started. It was closer this time, not on the upper catwalk, somewhere near the telescope itself. I turned in my chair and looked up at the platform. Nothing. I stood and walked to the base of the telescope, checked the mechanism, the mount, the focus assembly. Everything was normal. But the smell was stronger now, that dry, papery scent. And underneath it, something else, something rotten. The scraping moved to my left. I spun toward it. The catwalk was empty, but I saw something else. A distortion in the air near the eyepiece. Not a shadow, not exactly, more like a thickness. A place where the darkness seemed to concentrate. I took a step back. The distortion moved, flowed, like oil spreading across water. It drifted along the telescope's barrel, following the line of sight, tracing the path of the observation. I ran to the console and aborted the exposure. The dome lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The distortion was gone. I sat at the console for the next 3 hours, hands shaking, watching the empty dome. When dawn finally broke and pale light began filtering through the dome's narrow windows, I went outside and stood in the cold mountain air until my fingers went numb. I called the facility director that afternoon, told him I was experiencing technical difficulties and needed a site visit. He said the earliest he could send someone was next week, budget constraints, staffing issues, the usual excuses. I asked if Dr. Reeves had reported any problems before he left. There was a long pause on the line. Dr. Reeves didn't leave, the director said. He's still on medical leave, psychiatric evaluation. Why? I hung up. That night I didn't turn on the dome lights. I used my flashlight to navigate the catwalks, kept the telescope offline, and sat in the control room with my back to the wall, Dr. Reeves' notebook open on my lap. I found a new entry I'd missed before. Written on the inside back cover in letters so small I needed the flashlight pressed directly against the page to read them. It's not in the dome. It's in the telescope. It's been there the whole time, watching through the lens, looking back at us while we look out at the stars. The scraping started at 2:14 a.m. I didn't move, didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and listened as something dragged itself across the metal catwalks, slow and patient, circling the telescope in the center of the dome. At 3:07 a.m., my radio crackled, a voice I didn't recognize. "Are you seeing it?" I turned off the radio. The scraping continued until dawn. I haven't used the telescope since. I sit in the control room and log false data, fabricate observations. The facility director hasn't noticed yet, or if he has, he hasn't said anything. Maybe he already knows. Maybe Dr. Reeves wasn't the first. The scraping still happens every night, but now it's not just in the dome. Last night I heard it in the hallway outside the control room, that same slow, deliberate dragging sound, moving toward my door. I kept the lights off. It stopped right outside. I could hear something breathing on the other side of the door, slow, wet breaths that didn't sound like they came from anything human. When I finally opened the door at sunrise, there was nothing there, but the smell remained, that dry, papery rot. And in the dust on the floor, leading from the dome to my door and back again, there was a trail. Not footprints, something else, like something heavy had been dragged across the concrete, something that didn't want to be seen. I'm writing this from the control room. It's 1:47 a.m. The scraping started 18 minutes ago. This time, it's inside the room with me.